Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. There are so many issues for concerned citizens to wrestle with in the wake of this very strange presidential election campaign. We'll talk this time about how well or poorly the press did in covering the campaign and the very emotional reactions of so many people to the election of Donald Trump. My guests are Anya Schiffrin, a lecturer of international and public affairs at Columbia University and one of Anya's amazing students in the graduate program at the School of International and Public Affairs, Alexandra Solomon. Welcome, guys. Great to have you here. Thank you. So, Anya, I guess I'll start with you. So if you look back over the primary campaigns and then the Clinton-Trump face-off, how well or how poorly do you think the press did in general, overall?
Well, I think after sort of major upsets, as we've just seen, journalists often worry that they haven't done a good enough job.
And generally, we haven't.
Yeah, that's right. And you can always find something to criticize. So after the Iraq War, there was a lot of criticism that the New York Times and Judith Miller really sort of bought the line that there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and wasn't critical enough. After the 2008 financial crisis, there was a lot of criticism that the press should have seen it coming, that business journalists who covered the economy and who covered business were sort of captured by sources and believed too much what big business told them. So now journalists are going through this terrible sort of soul searching of what did they do wrong. And I think many journalists feel that the mistakes they made sort of echoed what the mistakes everybody else made, that they were sort of stuck in their bubble, in their echo chamber. They relied on the polls, they relied on data, and they didn't look closely enough at Trump. I've also heard people say, because of this, they didn't prepare enough to really expose a lot of what Trump was doing, the conflicts of interest, some of the seamier sides to his beliefs and his actions. And I've heard journalists say, to do a good investigative story, like finding his tax returns or unlocking some of his business interests, takes a really, really long time. And many of the big outlets that would normally be able to do this kind of investigative reporting didn't get started till too late, because it never occurred to them that he was going to run as the Republican nominee.
Alexandra, as the campaign was unfolding and you and your friends were talking about it, did you have a sense of how the press was doing? Were there aspects that you were dissatisfied with, or did you think that this is just, well, this is the norm?
I think the biggest thing that I struggled with and that my friends struggled with, and it's a buzzword now, is this false equivalency that you've seen.
You're anticipating one of my questions.
Yeah.
Good. Go for it, right.
It's something that we're all talking about. It's the false equivalency between Trump and Hillary, where she has been so villainized. All you hear about are her emails. So anytime that there's something brought up with him, whether it's his taxes or sexual assault, the things that fly out of his mouth, suddenly she's brought in as the villain because of her emails or because of her connections to big money, things like this. And it really is a false equivalency. You have a candidate, possibly one of the most qualified candidates for the presidency, and she's really been pushed in front of the bus because of these emails. And it's been incredible to me to speak with people who really hate her, I would say.
Yeah.
That's been really surprising to me, is this strong emotion coming from the right. People really emotionally, they're invested in hating her and disliking her, saying that she should go to prison. These Hillary for prison signs have really blown me away.
Yep.
So it's sort of painting her as just as bad as him has been wild to me.
So, Anya, I mean, I think clearly so many issues that Trump was far more egregious than Hillary ever was during the campaign. The press, I guess, gets involved in this false equivalency mesh because they want to be objective, or they want to be perceived as objective. You're there teaching young people, some of whom may go into the media in one form or another. What do you tell them about objectivity? How important is that, and how, even if you want to be objective, do you stay away from this false equivalence tendency?
Trump, first of all, is very good at figuring out how to message and to going around the media when he doesn't feel he's getting the hearing that he wants, right, as we've seen his use of YouTube and Twitter. So I think there's definitely a feeling that he was given way too much time on the talk shows to just sort of go on and on unchecked and to say just whatever he wanted. I think maybe even more important than the false equivalency is the fact that because of digital technology now, we have a very polarized and fragmented media environment. So the New York Times is doing sort of fantastic, thorough reporting, and then all the people that disagree with Trump just think the New York Times is biased and don't look at it. Right. So it's a constant, there's always been this problem with people kind of reading what they believe and remembering what they believe, but now they can do that. So I think this whole question of the false news that's circulated, for example, has been really tremendous. Stories, or not even stories, lies that have been discredited, like the idea that George Soros is paying the protesters, still went viral on social media. So, we've seen the New York Times did a sort of anatomy of how that it's really just rumor spread, and eventually the person who invented it, retracted it, but by that time it was too late. Everybody had read it. So I think that may be a huge, huge problem. All the false news, all the lies that just sort of circulate unchecked.
And in addition to the false news, I mean, you have these unreliable sources of news, or you have, especially on the web and on television, you have essentially commentary. It's not really reporting or news at all. So I guess my question to you, Alexandra, is where do you and your friends, your peers, get most of their news?
Well, I can speak to what I do, what my friends do. So, of course, what you mentioned about Facebook, Twitter, the echo chamber is very real. That's another buzzword that really holds a lot of weight, though. I think that the only reason why I've been exposed to any sort of right-wing media is because it's on the television in my family's home. Like, the only reason why I would watch Fox News is if I happen to walk by a television that's on. It's not in my social media feed at all.
Do the folks in your world read the New York Times online, for example, or do they read the Washington Post or publications like that?
Yeah, we for sure, and actually Columbia's done a really good job of giving us access to different major publications at either a student discount or we have access through the school. But those are the articles that's being shared in the echo chamber. It's not just, the messaging back and forth, but I was saying this earlier, I deleted Facebook off of my phone because I'm saturated. And then I realized that I had to download it again because for conveniency, going to the New York Times, going to the Wall Street Journal, checking these different things, it was much easier for me to just sit and watch what my friends are posting, scroll through and see what's going on.
But what about the idea of say reading the paper I still get the print edition.
Going to the website and reading it? Or, of course.
Because you would spot so many things that you otherwise wouldn't see. Is it a concern of yours that you're missing that you're missing a lot of news that way?
For sure, and that's also something that my friends and I have discussed. And you see people posting now saying, "Get out of the echo chamber." We can post these angry things, yell at each other in this, this space, but we really need to break out. We need to read other things. We need to see what's going on the other side. As advocates, as journalists, how can we even begin to tackle these issues if we're completely blind to it and we're not seeking it out?
Can I get in here?
Sure.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different things that are happening in these separate echo chambers. One is that what journalists are saying now is they should have done more reporting from the Rust Belt. They should have gone more out into the community and done more traditional journalism and relied less on data and done more reporting. So that might have helped all us New Yorkers who read the New York Times understand what was going on. But then there's the question of what's happening in all those communities where people are getting news from Facebook and aren't getting strong local reporting.
Right.
And I think to sort of look at the big picture, what we've seen over the last 20 years is because of the huge, huge financial hit that media has taken because of Google and because of the fact that advertising revenue has gone, small town papers and investigative reporting across the country has really been eviscerated. And I know you both travel around the country, and so do I. And when you pick up a local paper, there's no longer a lot of investigative reporting. And James T. Hamilton has just done a new book on sort of called Democracy's Detectives about what's happening to investigative reporting around the country. And it's there's less of it. there's fewer FOIA requests. The people winning Pulitzer Prizes are getting older and older.
Yeah.
And I remember when I covered small town school boards in Pennsylvania, which were taken over by taxpayers, stealth candidates, born-again Christians who were very anti-Semitic in the 1980s. You know, having all of these debates and arguments that we're seeing now played out across the country were playing out in these small towns. And the journalists who are in those towns doing investigative reporting were bringing truth to those areas and to those communities and sort of reinforcing some of the points made by the local parents groups and the local citizens groups. And a lot of that is gone now.
I agree 100%. And not only, it's not just that the local communities are not getting the benefits of that local journalism. As quiet as it's kept, the larger publications, the more national publications like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, relied on those local newspapers, the information that would come out of those local newspapers, come out of those investigative reporters to alert you that, well, this is something that's going on, and then you might then go into the area and cover it yourself. I mean, I think it's a tremendous loss for journalism.
Absolutely. I think that now journalists have sort of found their calling again. I think the next few years are going to be incredibly important for American journalism. You know, perhaps we've strayed too much into sort of celebrities and lifestyle, and this is really going to be the time when journalists are going to have to sort of stand up and take risks in the way that they've had to do in places like Turkey and Hungary and Venezuela and all those places around the world, China, Vietnam, who had governments that have hated the press and have cracked down on journalists. And the people who are covering those stories take enormous risks. And I think our journalists are going to have to do that too now.
I do too. And one of the challenges, though, is going to be financing this, where because the funding levels have in many cases collapsed. It's going to be very difficult. You anticipated another one of my questions when you talked about the split in some families, I guess in a lot of families, where some were for Clinton and some were for Trump. So who wants to take the first shot at that issue?
I'm happy to speak to that. So I think what you brought up earlier before we got on the air about the emotional reaction.
Yeah.
I think that this election has been so polarizing, not just politically, but emotionally. Social justice issues, the just rampant misogyny that has been internalized by so many people, unexpectedly so. It's been a personal struggle of mine. I've spoken with some other students, other friends of mine who are struggling with it. I grew up in Louisiana. I'm a blue baby from a red state. I love my liberal bubble in New York and Columbia, but it's a difficult issue to tackle. And I was joking around with Anya earlier today. I found myself Googling, like, how do you speak to family members voting for Trump? Right, and it's funny because it's actually a trending issue right now in Google. So I think that we're all just surprised by how emotional it has been, and we're not sure how to deal with it quite yet, because I think there are a lot of people on the right who voted for Trump and see it as a political issue.
Right.
And there are people like myself who are really invested in these issues personally, and we see it's not just politics. It's not just policy, it's the effect that policies have on people.
Right.
I hear people complaining about this issue of, trans individuals going into bathrooms. Like, that doesn't affect me because I'm not trans, so why would I care if they can use a bathroom or not? Things like that, like, it's not on my radar, so I shouldn't care about it. And something that I've been struggling with is, how do you get people to care about issues that don't necessarily affect them directly? How do you get people to vote on issues when maybe the money wouldn't be going towards them? How do you convince people to pay taxes because that money will then go towards people who need those programs?
Which is essentially, how do you get people to care about their fellow citizens?
Right, exactly.
Anya, this idea of the heightened emotions in the wake of this election, it's not limited to young people. I mean, we've seen it all over. So you have it, you'll see it in the classroom, but also I'm sure you see it with colleagues and relatives and friends like that. What do you tell people? How are you counseling people?
Yeah, well, I think At Columbia, it's been very sort of emotional the last couple weeks. The first thing, obviously, that I saw was so many of our students are really physically afraid now. Our Muslim students are afraid. Everyone, our foreign students are afraid. They have parents calling them up and saying, should you come home? Or are you going to get attacked? I think everybody feels personally affronted. My female students feel really demoralized. They feel that the country rejected the idea of a woman president. Our gay students feel that the country is bigoted. Our African American students. So I think everybody feels unwanted, unloved, unappreciated, demonized by this election. And a lot of students are kind of wondering where to go now. So some students who thought that they wanted to work for the U.S. government or work in the United States are wondering if it's time to look overseas. Students who thought that they wanted to move overseas or have spent the last couple of years studying international questions are now feeling that their country needs them. So part of the advice that we're giving is talking to them a little bit about their career options and what kinds of choices should they be making. This is clearly a time when our country needs us. I think we've all heard the message loud and clear that large sections of this country felt belittled and demeaned, that people are crying for jobs, that infrastructure, all of those things. So that's a lot of what we're talking about. Is kind of where do you go from here really, and what can we do that's constructive?
Alexandra, this whole idea of professional choices you had mentioned before, so that's actually affecting you personally. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. And that is the conversation that I think a lot of people are having, particularly individuals such as myself. I have friends who came to SIPA, came to Columbia to study international affairs. My personal interest is actually in the former Soviet Union, where we have very flagrant dictatorships. I never thought that I would face those issues at home. I have studied former Soviet republics. I have studied all of the human rights violations that come with that. Press freedom, freedom of speech, all these different major violations that are occurring across the world from here. So it has really been shocking. We're having a visceral reaction to the fact that these issues that we were planning to tackle abroad have now come home. Our house is on fire. So do you stay here? Do you tackle these issues here? Do you continue on this path that you had set out from the beginning? And I think that there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of resentment, there's a lot of guilt, I think, as well. If I do leave, if I do continue to pursue goals abroad, am I abandoning
serious issues?
Yeah, for sure. So I haven't figured that out quite yet. I'll let you know when I do. But I think that that's a very salient issue right now at school. And I think that you have students who have come to Columbia on fellowships, on scholarships from the government. If you're on a Pickering or a Wrangell and you've dedicated X amount of years to the federal government once you graduate, what do those students do now? A lot of people have said that they refuse to work under the Trump administration. Right. But then there are also people who do feel, galvanized, and they want to dedicate themselves to public sector work and try to make a change from within. Right. And I commend those people who are capable of doing that.
Let's talk a little bit about misogyny. Anya, obviously it came up in a big way during the campaign because of both Trump's own words and his behavior. But it's not so big an issue right now. I mean, the press is focused on the transition and other matters. We talk a lot in this country about race and ethnic issues. Should we be talking about misogyny in the same way, or sort of give it the same kind of attention?
Yeah, well, I think, just a little bit building on what we're also talking about Columbia and universities, which is we're so used to research, analysis, trying to understand the world and trying to understand it in a sort of rigorous analytical way. And so I think for all of us, the racism against Obama, the misogyny against Clinton has been really shocking, because I think apart from the terrible ideas that are being expressed, the whole idea that people can just be irrational and that all this prejudice and racism and sexism is now allowed to flourish and has become acceptable. And so I think that's really shocking and feels to a lot of us that the gains that we had made have just been, are in danger. We're in danger of losing them. And, I heard somebody or other say, well, at least now we know where we stand. And I don't actually agree. I think when you have a climate where it suddenly becomes okay to really, really attack people because they're black or because they're women, that's actually very, very dangerous. And that's when you lead to a really terrible downward spiral, I think.
I agree. I think it's extremely dangerous, but were either of you surprised that after misogyny became such a big issue, Trump's behavior became such a big issue during the campaign, white women still voted for Donald Trump? And even white women with a college education, Hillary won that group, but only by a very small margin, 51% of the vote she got. Were you surprised by that?
Of course, absolutely. And I think, I don't know many Trump supporters because I do live in my New York bubble, but I think that the people that supported Trump, many of them who are, educated and smart and kind people, just weren't taking that seriously. They sort of dismissed it. Oh, he's just saying that, or he doesn't really mean it. One Trump supporter I met earlier this year said, "Oh, it's a guy thing. It's not for real."
Locker room talk.
Yeah, locker room talk.
Yeah, but it's not.
And he was good at reframing, and so were his supporters.
I guess he did. Well, you refer to yourself as a feminist now. I came of age when feminism really was a big deal in the society. It was a big political issue and a big social and cultural issue. What does it mean to be a feminist in the United States in sort of the second decade of the 21st century now?
First of all, I think that these enormous terms, what does it mean to be a feminist? I think that first of all, I think that feminism is lacking. It's missing from the public discourse right now in general. Like you said, there are other things that have sort of taken the main stage. I think misogyny is certainly something that needs to be covered. What does it mean to be a feminist? And this is something that I've also struggled to communicate to people who sort of work outside of academia and are not studying. I'm studying gender at Columbia right now. So it's such a loaded word that has really been hijacked by the right. The word feminist has become a dirty word in a lot of places.
Much like liberal has as
right.
well.
Right, those feminists. My feminism is very different from a lot of other people's feminism. It's a very intersectional issue. And there's a lot of division within feminism. You see people talk about, white feminism, different waves of feminism. So there's a lot of competition within the discourse. But I think overall, and again, this goes back to the issue of the echo chamber. It's been covered a lot in my world because, all of my friends are wild, outgoing feminists who are, we've taken to the strip room, burning your bras, whatever the cliches are. My news feed on Facebook, it's full of articles. We're reading. It's in the Times, but it's in Mike. It's covered by Vox, by Vice, by all these other news outlets that really have made this a priority. Yeah. But I think that the press and mainstream media maybe hasn't picked up on these things and should.
I wish we had more time.
Yeah.
We could just talk about feminism and misogyny for an entire show. So maybe we'll get you guys back. Anyway, thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks a lot.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. The press has gone out of its way to treat Donald Trump the way it would treat any normal president-elect. But Trump is not even close to America's civic or cultural norm. He's a man who has bragged in the most grotesque way of his penchant for abusing women. He's a president-elect who doesn't know the first thing about any of the important issues facing the United States. When he is asked serious questions about policy, his answers are, for the most part, incoherent. He has demonstrated contempt for the idea that the President of the United States should avoid conflicts of interest and should not use the highest, most sacred office in the land as leverage to reap breathtaking amounts of money for himself and his family. He believes that global warming, the biggest and gravest challenge facing not just the United States, but the entire globe, is a hoax perpetrated to benefit the Chinese. He's a man who has unapologetically placed in the highest quarters of his administration individuals who are idolized by white supremacists and anti-Semites. His election as president has spread the starkest kind of fear through the hearts of scores of millions of Americans. Latino children petrified about what may happen to their parents, other relatives and friends, and to themselves. Muslims worried about their treatment at the hands of a man who has painted people of that religion with the broadest and most hostile of brushes. And women who have no idea what may be in store from a man who has vowed to use the presidency and the Supreme Court to take away reproductive rights and who, by his own admission, clearly sees women from a predatory perspective. While there is so much for Donald Trump to learn and to do, he's nevertheless been busy at times tweeting about the unfairness of protesters outside Trump Tower and around the nation, and about the coverage he's been receiving in the New York Times, and the skits about him on Saturday Night Live, which he thinks are not funny, and also unfair. And of course, the plea from the cast of Hamilton to Vice President-elect Pence that the Trump administration represent all of America. Donald Trump found that to be rude. So the press can continue to cover Trump as though there is something normal about his accession to the presidency. That won't change the fact that the emperor has no clothes, that Donald Trump is the greatest threat to our civic and political norms, to civil and human rights in America, and perhaps to America's very security in my lifetime. That's all for now. See you next time.